meal? What do you use it for? And so I think we ended up like tossing it once it started getting weevils in it. But yeah, it was just that kind of experience.
Oh, I was just gonna say like things like that in grade school and whatnot, and also just like poverty. Like I remember when I was younger in school, when I didn't have things like that, I hate my mom because I was like, all the other kids have it and I don't. I remember my grade school, they wore uniforms, and my mom was like, oh, well, you're not gonna go to school in a uniform because I don't have the money to get it for you yet. And I was always the only one without one, so then I'd always be mad at my mom because I didn't understand really like it.
Right. And we don't have the language or the understanding that there is some like structural limitations of the adults who are taking care of us. You kind of assume like, well, you're the adult, you're supposed to be able to have all this stuff. And you're too young to understand that like they have limitations as well, and so you end up blaming them, and it causes a lot of tension that is unnecessary or is misdirecting. Yeah.
So did you guys have any tension towards your parents when you were younger?
Or had. Have or had.
Personally, I don't think so. I mean, I think I had more tension with students. I think especially when I got to middle school, because when I was in elementary, both of my older sisters and I went to the same elementary. My older sister went to a different middle school because then we had to move, and then me and my middle sister went to the same middle school. And during this time, my father was still in the United States, and I would help him over the weekends because he would pay me for helping him. You know, I had a job. And I remember this kid who was from middle school, like when I went to middle school, no one knew that I had parents that worked in an ice cream truck. No one. Everyone in elementary did because they saw little Roxy going into the ice cream truck as my mom was selling, and then I would help my mom too, be like, oh, what do you guys want? And then in middle school, this kid saw me, and I was like, oh, crud, like no, like this is not supposed to happen. And then he started making fun of me, and this was in 6th grade, so I was beginning my teen angst too early. So yeah, he started making fun of me, and then he told this other boy who like didn't even know like what this other kid was talking about, so he started making fun of me too. He's like, oh, I hear you work in an ice cream truck, and your parents work in an ice cream truck. So I was about to beat him up because I was a little aggressive. And I mean, and I mean, yeah, and like my 6th grade teacher, who was also a 2nd generation immigrant, he saw me and he told me, he said, you shouldn't listen to kids like that. Like, you should be proud of where your parents come from because they clearly have raised you and the way you are, and you shouldn't let that bother you. And I mean, I remember like I was so aggravated. I was like, why are these kids making fun of me? Like, who are they to say like, oh, your parents working in an ice cream truck? Like, if I'm not saying that other jobs were less or more than what my parents did, but I mean at the same time, I don't know if their parents had jobs like hardworking jobs as well. And I mean, I never picked on people. Oh, your father's a gardener, like, ha. Like, I mean, and I think that's something that some kids don't understand. Like, they don't cherish. They don't. I'm not saying take pride in it, but they like kind of belittle their parents. And I mean, I've learned to say, yeah, my mom works in an ice cream truck. Like, it sucks, but I mean, she's there working and she's making money, sadly, that way. But I mean, it's better than her, I guess not having a job.
For me, actually, it was very difficult to go shopping with my mom because I lived in the north of England in a very small fishing village, very much white, and it was quite racist. So I felt like I always needed to do what I needed to do to protect myself. And so my mom always wore traditional, Indian clothes. She was always in a sari. And I remember there were times when I just would have to go with her, whether it was grocery shopping or doctors or whatever. And I would either walk way ahead, or I would be, like way behind because I did not want anybody to know that that was my mother. And, you know, yeah, you know, looking back on it, I mean, I think it's horrible. But, you know, when you're a child, all you're trying to do is just get through another day. And you know, you're trying to fit in, and you're trying to get accepted, because some of you have heard this story, but one of the things that shaped my thinking that way was my very first day at school. And you know, I remember going into the classroom, there was a round table, and we were all sitting there, and the teacher had asked one of the girls to take care of me and said, Carol, you know, you'll be in charge of taking care of Daksha, showing her around and everything. And at that point, I spoke English, but you know, growing up in Africa, the British English was sort of a little bit different, and racism, we didn't understand, I didn't even know that there was really a difference or whatever. And I just remember a boy at the table saying, on the very first day, and saying, oh great, another N-word. And I did not take offense to it because I didn't know what the N-word meant, but because he prefaced it with the word great, I thought, can only be good, right? And so that was what was in my mind. And then, but you know, years later on, as time went on, I found out that this is not actually a nice thing. And then just even things like walking down the road, and kids would shout across the road, Paki! And I'm like, I'm not even Pakistani. What are you talking about? You know, just things like that. And so when you're a child, when you're a kid, you try to sort of protect yourself. And so I would find myself distancing from my own culture and family members if they were dressed traditionally, or even if they ate Indian food or something like that. You know, I mean, I remember I used to be a vegetarian. I started to eat meat because it was like, okay, I've got to fit in somehow. And it was a real mixed emotions of how, you know, to fit in these two worlds. You know, it was very, very, very challenging.
Yeah, it was not so much directed at my dad, more so at my mom. She was home more, and my dad used to just like, he was a truck driver, so he'd be gone for days and like weeks and things. But it was kind of like a process. Like I would be first mad at my mom because why don't you understand? Like, just why are you not understanding? She didn't understand the concept of a sleepover. So like sleepovers until really like I got to college, like never happened. And now when I go home, like it's a bit more common. It's been a while since she was like, well, your brothers didn't sleep over anywhere, so you're not. Like, why would you sleep over someone else's house when you have a perfectly good bed? She didn't understand. And I would, it makes sense.
I remember that conversation with my mom.
Yeah. So I would just be like, why aren't you understanding? First I'd get mad at that. Then it kind of shifted to a little bit later, and this was actually a couple of years ago recently that I started changing mine. But for a long time I was like, okay, I get that you don't understand, but why don't you just accept it? Like, you may not understand it, but you're here, you're in the States, you have to adapt to your sort of lifestyle. You should just accept that this is what happens. Like, if I can't explain it to you, that's too bad. Like, you just have to accept it. This is what happens. And she would fight me on everything. And a lot more fighting when I was, I went through that rebellious stage pretty early, from like 9 until 13. And then I was okay. But yeah, so then it changed to why aren't you just accepting it? Why aren't you just accepting the kind of life that you have here? And this is how the reality is now. And now, kind of like what was mentioned earlier, it's sort of defeated. Like, my mom doesn't know I'm in a sorority because I don't have the language skills, and nor does she have that idea of a sorority. She just doesn't know what it is. The rest of my family knows. And, you know, it's a pretty big part of my life here, so when I have to go buy, like, things for it, she's like, oh, what are you gonna buy? I was just like, school supplies. Like, that's about as much as I can tell her. So now it's kind of just sort of exasperated or defeated. Like, you don't understand, you're never going to understand. That's just the way it is, and that's how I'm gonna have to take it. There's a lot of distance between us now, I think.
And I think what's interesting here is that what you're touching on is something that is not unique about, you know, the adolescent experience, because everybody goes, you know, often, you know, the tension with parents, but there's something also very unique when you have, you know, an immigrant family that's part of that, you know, that stage in your life. You're going through, you know, hormones and identity crisis, but on top of that, there's also the, you know, the cultural differences that occurs. And, you know, what manifests also then often is that resentment towards parents. And one of the things, and you know, just kind of opening this up to everybody is, you know, in what ways does this mean that perhaps the way we think about the relationships between parents and children are very narrowly defined, right? So I resented my mom a lot because I didn't have, and my grandmother, right, because she was mostly the maternal figure in that, but I didn't have that kind of like female bond that I had seen or read about in books. And you know, it took a lot of years in therapy to realize, well, wait a minute, my definition of what a mother-daughter or you know, the daughter-granddaughter relationship was like was very white, very middle class, very suburban, very, you know, mid to late 20th century. And like, it didn't happen until way later on, but it would have saved me a lot of grief if somebody had told me, like, actually maybe the standard for what you think a parent-child relationship is actually not that universal, right? And I don't know if, you know, any of you have thought about that, or, you know, where do you see the kind of ethnocentrism that is all over the place in terms of parent-child relationships? I don't know. Ellie?
One thought I sort of had about that is, so my dad's from New Zealand. I grew up in the U.S. My mother grew up in Delaware as well. But I think having a father who, you know, looks white but has a funny accent, but is clearly sort of Westerner, it's really different. But he's also like the only New Zealander. You know, there's no other ones around, and I think people have great difficulty knowing what is like a trait of him because of his New Zealand culture, and what is a trait of him as an individual. And you maybe see that really differently if you're from Mexico and there's lots of Mexicans and you can kind of take averages in some way. What's a cultural phenomena and what's this person who likes this thing, right? So I think everyone in Delaware that knows my parents think that all New Zealanders like gardening. You know, that's not necessarily true. And I wonder if getting at this thing, it's really hard with identity to know, you know, what parts of this identity you're embracing and taking on. You know, in what ways was your mother this way because she was Filipino and came from this culture?
Right.
And to what extent do you sort of say, you know, there's lots of American suburban white mothers who are also strict, or not affectionate, or not something else. And it's a really interesting tension of how much is you sort of excusing or explaining or whatever the resentment because of who they are versus this larger cultural phenomena they might be a part of. And so I guess I'm curious your thoughts on individuals versus the whole.
And that's where I'm at now. Like, I don't know, right? So, yeah.
For me, because of how my child was and all those struggles and that, right? Now that I have a daughter, it's very different, you know, because it shaped my thinking in how am I going to be with my child? Because as you get older, you do realize that, wow, that was really dumb. Is that how I really treated my mom or dad? You know, you just start to realize sort of those things. And so for me, with my daughter, my approach is sort of very different in the sense that I try to show her all there is to know about the Indian culture, but from the point of view that I know that she will be intrigued and you know, sort of fascinated by it and is sort of proud. And now she does, and you know, she wants to wear Indian clothes when we go out or try different cultural things. She likes to listen to Indian music now, you know, because she also sees that she has other Indian cousins that are her age, or well, not her age, a little bit older, but they're into this. So okay, mom thinks it's cool, but I don't. But well, my cousins think it's cool, so I like it now, kind of thing, you know. So it's really, for me, it's really nice. I feel really blessed, to be honest with you, that I'm watching this young person not having to struggle the way I did, it feels so good knowing that she can actually, you know, she's in both. And I mean, she's, like I said, she's born and raised here, so this is very rural, and there are times when I'm sort of surprised because I'm like, wow, she's really Midwestern, that's not me whatsoever, you know? But I accept that that's part of where she's at too, so, yeah. It's just, yeah.
It's 36, is that? Yeah, I think, is there any sort of last questions? Yeah, last question.
I guess kind of, since there's like broad spectrum of like age and everything, when did you kind of figure out or like think about it in your own mind that you were no longer just any child, but you were a different type of child, and not just any different type of child, but you are what